Shabbat Shalom. And therefore, so I mentioned in my rabbi's update yesterday the concept of what's known by the rabbis as Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide commandments. Okay, and the idea, and certainly it's not explicit in the Parsha in the way that we would think it's explicit, but it's derived from things said in the Parsha, and therefore, so in Halacha, there's biblical commands and rabbinic commands. This is considered a biblical command, even though it was derived by the rabbis, okay? So if you are a non-Jew and you want to achieve the world to come, you have to follow these 7 mitzvot. Okay, so what are they? Not to worship idols, not to take a false oath in the name of God, not to murder, not to commit sexual immorality, not to steal, and not to eat flesh cut from an animal while still alive. Those are the 6 prohibitions, and then there's a positive obligation to establish courts of law. Okay, as I said, these are deduced from the covenant God makes with Noah after the flood, and Rabbinic Judaism says any non-Jew who follows these mitzvot can have a place in the world to come. However, Maimonides says not necessarily. Okay, if you follow them as mitzvot, as commandments of, like if you think they're a good idea, right? If you arrive at them philosophically and you say, you know what, the world would be better if everybody did these things. No, you have to follow them as divine commands. Okay, not as things that you derive through human intelligence. You have to follow them as divine commands. Okay, now that's really interesting why Maimonides would say that. Okay, and I have over the years, as I'm sure many of us have had, discussions about whether an atheist can be a good person, right? And my thing is, of course, an atheist can be a good person, but I believe that a system of laws that is not rooted in an idea that these are divine commandments and that there is a risk to not following them of incurring the wrath of God, ultimately it comes down to sort of utilitarianism. Right, and the minute society decides, you know what, the heck with all this, right? The stronger person gets the stuff, right? And if there's somebody stronger than that, no, then I think society's headed to collapse. Now, this is not to say that I think that institutions of the state need to proclaim a religious basis, quite the opposite. But I do think if human beings don't believe there's a religious basis, then ultimately it's going to collapse. But that's my perspective. We can argue about it later, okay? But the question is, right, so the big question is really what's idolatry, right? What is idolatry? Because well, let me read this Mishnah. I've taught this before, but it's worth looking at again. Okay, the first Mishnah in Tractate Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah literally means strange worship, but it's the Hebrew term for idolatry. Okay, now why do we have laws of idolatry? Because we're supposed to stay away from idolaters, right? And so how do we know who's an idolater? And this is the first mission. For a period of 3 days before their festivals, okay, and one of the things is that, because remember, printing wasn't invented, right? And this stuff came down, it was written by hand by scribes, okay? And they were also all along, they knew that there were non-Jews who read Hebrew, right? So it's not always clear what the text actually is, right? And so before their festivals, and there are two different words that are used, goyim, right, which means non-Jews, and akum, which means pagan, okay? And it makes a difference, right? Are we talking about Gentile festivals or pagan festivals? And it's not really so clear. Okay, but it says for a period of 3 days before these festivals, whoever they are, it is forbidden to engage in business transactions with them, to ask them for something or to be asked for something by them, to lend or to borrow from them, and to absolve them from debt or be absolved by them from them. Rabbi Yehuda says it is permitted to be absolved from debt from them since it causes them distress. The sages said to him, even though they might be in distress at the outset, they will eventually be happy. Right? So what is the point? The point is that, if I do a business transaction with a pagan, right? And the pagan says, oh, thank Zeus that I made such a good deal, right? Well, why is that my problem? Why is that my problem? That my trading partner is going to thank Zeus or thank Jupiter for having made a good business deal? Why is that my problem? Alan.
Basically, what you're doing is you're helping the pagan believe that this is a power that gives him gifts, and so you're encouraging that belief, not a belief in the supreme being.
Correct, right? I'm encouraging that idolatrous belief, right? And I mean, who, according to Judaism, who is forbidden to be an idolater? Everyone, right? Who is forbidden to assist other people to sin? Jews, right? So if I help an idolater commit his or her idolatry, I've sinned because I've helped them to sin, right? So if the text says goyim, if it says akum, if it says pagans, so fine. But if it says Gentiles, right, then we've got a problem, right? Because name me a day that is not either 3 days before or 3 days after a Gentile holiday. There's none, right? Because whether you're dealing with Muslims and it's Friday, or it's Christians that are Sunday, right? Every day is within 3 days of one of their holidays, right? So therefore, if we understand it to mean that we can't do business with Gentiles within 3 days of their holidays, we can never do business with Gentiles. Yeah.
How do you define pagan?
That's what I'm getting to. So first of all, right, if the text says Gentiles, we're all out of luck, right? So we have to hope that it says pagan, and certainly we read it as pagan. All right, and so then, therefore, who is a pagan, right? Who is a pagan? And according to the Meiri, who lived in the 13th century. All right, we know what something is by knowing what something is not, right? And who is not a pagan? Who is not a pagan, according to McGeary? People who are delimited by the ways of religion. In other words, if your religion teaches you to act morally, you are not a pagan, right? As long as your religion teaches you to act morally, you're not a pagan, right? So, writ large, Christians and Muslims are not pagans, right? Now, I would say that there are certain forms of Christianity that are pagan, right? No, seriously, I mean, if your religion teaches you, if your form of Christianity teaches you to hate Jews, gays, immigrants, Christians who are not of your denomination, Democrats, people who believe that the 2020 election was fair, people who believe that COVID exists, people who believe that COVID vaccinations are useful, et cetera, then you are a pagan. You are. I mean, this is not a joke, because your religion does not teach you to act moral, right? But if your religion, they would say the same thing about us, by the way, right? They would say that we're pagans because our religion, by teaching us to respect other people, et cetera, teaches us to act immoral, right? It's all a question of respect, right? But as long as your religion teaches you to behave morally, then for business and interpersonal matters, you are supposed to be treated the same as any Jew, right? So that's Meiri, and so that includes Christians and Muslims for sure, right? Because you also have to read it in terms of, because there's still a prohibition against idolatry, right? So now we have to define idolatry, right? So if you go to a church, or particularly a Catholic or an Orthodox church, right, you're going to see lots of icons, right? And it seems as if people are praying to them, right? But as I said before, somebody who knows nothing about Judaism and comes into our shul and sees us walking around and kissing the Torah, right? And then we bow and there's trees on either side of the ark, might think that we're idolaters, right? So it's not a question of what it looks like to you, it's a question of what it means to that person, right? And so Tosafot came up, and this is, I find this fascinating, okay? The concept of what is known as shituf, or association, right? So, meaning that you associate things with God that are not God, right? But the God that you associate things with is the true God. Okay, so the belief in Jesus, right, is therefore shituf. In other words, what is incarnation, right? The belief that God took on the flesh of a human being, right? God was incarnated in the flesh of Jesus of Nazareth, right? So from the perspective of Judaism, I'll put it politely, that is a belief that we cannot go along with, right? But the God that Christians erroneously believe was incarnated in Jesus is the true God, right? That God created the world, brought Israel out of Egypt, gave us the Torah, right? That's the God that they believe. So they don't believe in the wrong God. They have wrong beliefs about the right God, right? You understand what I'm saying? They don't believe in the wrong God. They have wrong beliefs about the right God, but they worship the right God, just in the wrong way with wrong beliefs. Okay? And that is, there's nowhere in the Torah that it says Gentiles can't do that. Right? It says Jews can't do that, right? So if a Jew becomes, if a Jew becomes a Christian, under halacha, they've committed a capital offense. Right now, obviously, we have no ability nor desire to follow through on that, right? But if a Jew becomes a Christian under halacha, they've committed a capital offense. But Gentiles are allowed to be Christians because they have wrong ideas about the right God, right? And all the more so Muslims, right? Because the only wrong idea that they have, their beliefs about God are identical to Jewish beliefs about God. They don't believe that Muhammad was in any way a divine figure. They just believe that Muhammad got a book by divine revelation, and we don't believe that that was the case, right? But so what, right? And this is the reality, right? We live in a pluralistic society. We encounter all types of people, and we want and need to build good relations with them, right? And once, there's a book about the history of Jewish assimilation in this country, written by a Roman Catholic priest, called The Ordeal of Civility by John. Right? In other words, if you look at, the whole history of conservative Judaism, I'm going to try and wrap up, but if you look at the whole history of conservative Judaism, how did conservative Judaism in this country come to be? Okay, prior to 1880 or so, the overwhelming majority, so first the original Jews came, there were Sephardim from Spain, all right, and then they were overtaken by German Jews, right, highly acculturated, highly assimilated German Jews, right? And then 1880, 1890, all of a sudden these hundreds of thousands of Yiddish-speaking, primitive, dirty, fanatic Jews started coming. And the German Jews looked at them and said, on the one hand, they're our brothers and we have to take care of them. On the other hand, we don't want to really be associated with them, right? Because they're not like us. Okay, so we got to cure them of their fanatic Orthodox beliefs, right? Do we want them in our Reformed temples? No. Do they want to come to our Reformed temples? No. Also no, right? So let's come up with a form of Judaism that is more socially acceptable, that these primitive Yiddish-speaking filthy fanatics will, right, like most of our grandparents or great-grandparents, right, will find less foreign, less alien, and less unaccepted, right? And that way, on the one hand, we don't have to deal with them in our temples. On the other hand, we don't have to be embarrassed by them, and they're fanatic. And that's how conservative Judaism really, the people who funded JTS were all Reformed Jews. They were all Reformed Jews. Schiff and Morgenthau and all these people, they were all German Reformed Jews, and they paid for JTS. Okay, and so, but once the price of acceptance into American society was to check your distinctiveness at the door, right? It no longer is, right? I hear very little, about the fact that the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor is a Hindu, right? I mean, you may like Aruna Miller, you may dislike her, you may be inclined to vote for her, you may be inclined not to vote for her, but I haven't heard a single person say, well, I can't vote for her because she's a Hindu. Who cares? Nobody, right? We evaluate people by their skills, by their character, by their political beliefs, not by their religion. But believe me, one generation, 2 generations ago, a Hindu lieutenant, I mean, would have been unheard of, right? So it's a challenge if you simply look, right? Again, I mean, if you go into it, I mean, I spoke about Catholic Church, go to a Hindu temple, right? And by Lord, it certainly looks like idolatry, right? But if you ask an educated Hindu, there's one God, these are different aspects of that one God, the same as a practitioner of Kabbalah. We'll say the difference is there's not 12 gods, there's one God, but they have different. So anyway, I went longer than I planned, I'm sorry. These are some thoughts. You're welcome to them. If you don't like them, I have others. Kehilat Shalom. We continue with the Kaddish before Musaf and the Musaf service 155 or 428, and then